Next, let's add the pagination dots that indicate which slide you are currently viewing. If we head over to our HTML, we can simply create a new element within our cycle slideshow div that has a class of cycle-pager, and the cycle2 script will take care of all the heavy lifting. So if I save and refresh, we can now see 3 dots which represent the 3 slides. If there were 4 slides in our slideshow, then cycle2 would output 4 dots. Let's begin by positioning this pager element to sit at the top of our slideshow horizontally centered. So to do that, let's head over to our style sheet. Let's create a new rule for cycle pager. I'm going to use position absolute. I want it to sit down about 20 pixels from the top, and I will be sure to assign it a large z-index value so that it is not overlapped by the slides themselves. So if we refresh, there it is. But remember, I also wanted it to be horizontally centered. So to achieve that, I will make the cycle pager element use the full available width, and then I will tell it to use text align center. Much better. Now let's focus on styling the dots themselves. So if I right-click on the dots and click Inspect Element, you can see that there is a span for each dot. Now we didn't add these spans for each dot. We simply created the empty cycle pager element. And cycle2 is dynamically inserting a span to represent each slide. And we can see that cycle2 also adds a class of cycle pager active to the dot that represents the currently displayed slide. Now we are interested in customizing the appearance of these dots. So let's see what's actually in each one of these spans. So it's a bullet. I don't want the bullet to display, so I'll show you a neat way to completely customize this. In our CSS, let's create a rule for cycle pager span. So we're styling each one of the dots. Now I don't want that actual bullet character to display, so I'm going to use text indent -9,000 pixels. Let's make sure that each dot or each span element is using inline block. Let's make them a 10 pixel circle. So width 10 pixels, height 10 pixels, and if we want it to be a circle, we simply set the border radius to 50%. By default, let's make the dots white, so background color, white. Let's add a bit of spacing horizontally between the dots, so margin. We use shorthand, so 0 and 4. So vertically we don't want to add any margin, but horizontally, so that means on the left and the right sides, we'll add 4 pixels. Let's add a property of cursor pointer so that they look like links when we hover over them. And let's save and refresh and see how things look. So there are the dots. However, they aren't lighting up to display which one is the currently active slide. So if we inspect them again, you can see that the exact name of that class is cycle pager active. So let's just create a special class or a special rule, cycle pager active. So if an element has that class, instead of using white background, we want to use a background of black. So now we can see that the first slide is displaying, so the first dot is lit up, and now the second, and if we advance through these rapidly, now the third. So our work with the pagination is complete. Now I promised earlier in the lesson that we would set up a call to action button in the text area, so let's do that very quickly. Over in our HTML, for our first slide, here it is, the B slide, at the end of this paragraph element, let's add a link. It says call to action. You could insert any text that you would like, but let's give this element a class of button A. Again, you could choose any class name you like. This is just what I'm choosing. So then in our CSS, let's create a comment to stay organized. Button A style. So now we can create a style that looks like a button. So I like to begin with a bit of padding. 6 pixels vertically, 10 pixels horizontally. Let's give it rounded edges, so border radius 5 pixels. Let's make the font bold. Let's make it use all capitals, so text transform uppercase. Let's give it a blue background color, and I'm going to paste in a hexadecimal code for blue. Let's make the text white. So if we save and refresh, there is our call to action button. Let's make the font a bit smaller. So font size 84%. And let's also add a bit of margin left so that it's not super close to the standard text. Oops. Margin left, 10 pixels. Much better. Let's add a quick hover style. So when someone hovers over the call to action button, it changes. Button A, hover. So let's switch the background color and text color when someone hovers over it. So the background color will be white, and the text color will be the blue value. Excellent. Now, one quick feature that we should change about Cycle 2 is that if someone is hovering over the text area, or actually anywhere on a slide, it shouldn't auto-advance to the next slide, because that can be very frustrating. Imagine a user was just about to click this call to action button, and then the slideshow auto-advanced, and they could no longer click it. So all we need to do to fix that is head over to our HTML. Our cycle slideshow div, the parent div, we can add an additional data attribute of data cycle pause on hover and provided a value of true. It's that simple. So Cycle 2 is incredibly flexible. So now we can see that because I'm hovering over the slide and I'm getting ready to click on the call to action button, Cycle 2 will never automatically advance to the next slide. But as soon as I move my mouse off of the slideshow and wait a few seconds, Cycle 2 knows to advance again. Now, the final feature of Cycle 2 that I want to highlight in this lesson is that it plays along very nicely with responsive layouts. Some slideshow scripts lock you into a certain width or height, but not Cycle 2. So for example, if I make the browser window smaller to resemble perhaps a smartphone factor, we can see that obviously our text area takes up too much space, but the slideshow itself still functions just like we would expect. So we can make this fully responsive quite easily. On a smartphone, I think all we need to change is that the text area, instead of overlapping the image, should simply sit below the image. So to do that, I'm just going to head over to our style sheet, find the slide text selector. Here it is. Let's create a really quick media query. Media screen and max width, 767 pixels. So actually anything that's smaller than a tablet. Slide text should no longer use position absolute, just use position static, so standard positioning. And instead of having a semi-transparent background, just use solid black. So if we refresh, that looks a lot better for the smartphone form factor. But if someone's using a larger device, they still receive the classic overlay styling that we set up. And that's going to conclude this lesson. Hopefully you've noticed that Cycle 2 is incredibly flexible. Now you can extrapolate what we've learned today to create any type of slideshow you can imagine. So this is an example of how we can leverage JavaScript without writing JavaScript. So we can let a solution like Cycle 2 handle the on-the-fly manipulation of the page, and then leverage our own HTML and CSS skills to fully customize things. I encourage you to experiment and create your own unique layout and styles for a slideshow, and I will see you in the next lesson.